well. So another season goes down. Another series that the Leafs had a great start in and then just couldn't complete the win. They won 2, then lost 4 straight. We've seen stuff like that before, Aaron, but I think this time hurts because this team felt different. Is that a fair statement?
I think you could say that. I mean, the expectation was always there that we would try to do something, but also the fear was always there that, like previous years, it was going to be exactly the same. And at the end of the day, it turned out to be exactly the same. Just more of the same. I had friends that were placing huge bets on the Leafs to choke in Game 7 after having struggled and fought valiantly and finally earned a win on the road. And what do you know? Yeah, 6-1. That would just mm, delightful. Um, and as a Leafs fan for 45 plus years, it's again, it's something that you're kind of traumatized into expecting. I understand as a Canadian team fan in general, and as a Toronto fan in general, I do always want to see my teams do well, but this always just seems like an extra kick in the pants.
Yeah, um, I just have to say that at some point, at some point, there has to be character in the playoffs that appears, and it really doesn't matter where it comes from. It really doesn't. It can come from a bottom 6 forward. It can come from a top 6 forward. It can come from a goaltender. It can come from coaching brilliance, right? There's so many different ways that this big game can be won. But the one thing that has to happen is you have to play in a game 7 with the strictest of discipline to not allow any easy goals, because in a game 7, easy goals can turn into a nightmare, and that's what we saw here. My biggest disappointment was in the first goal. Riley was up at center ice, and the Florida Panther was skating across the blue line, and it turned into a 2-on-1. This is something that happens too often with the Maple Leafs, where they break down before the other team does. And in this situation, sadly, it really seems to, in my opinion, it seems to blow the air out of all the tires that the Leafs are sitting on. It's like the whole thing goes flat. All of a sudden, you're going like, remember Burke saying, the semi going down the hill out of control. It just takes that one mistake, and for some reason, this team in Game 5 and Game 7 repeated the same problem. They were unable to recover from a dumbass mistake. Instead, they compounded the dumbass mistake.
Yeah, and Jonesy got the first one assisted by Rodriguez and Barkov. Lundell got the second goal assisted by Luosterainen and Marchand. There's the thing that we couldn't stop. Again, and it's we're at home. We have the player matchup, and that fourth line for Florida of Lundell, Luosterainen, and Marchand combined for 3 goals. Like, this is coming. You know the source of this. You know that Brad Marchand has had the Maple Leafs number no matter what team he plays on. He's been sticking it to Toronto Maple Leafs, most notably to Austin Matthews in the Four Nations face-off when Brad played for Canada as well. This is not an unknown quantity, and I know that there have been jokes made in the past about, well, we built a team to beat the Maple Leafs, and now the question now becomes, does Toronto have to build teams to beat specific other players? This has been since April of 2015. This has been 10 years now of a 5-year Shanna plan where nothing has worked. Players have been paid handsomely in advance of actual performance. There's no such thing as bridge deals. All these guys end up with front-loaded contracts, and for what? Now they're literal millstones around people's neck because we can't get rid of them because they all have modified no trade or modified no movement clauses. They're all one-way contracts. Can't send them down to the minors to get them to shape up or shape out. We are hamstrung by our own supposed brilliance in believing that a former junior manager from the Sioux Greyhounds who had some success with an NHL affiliate would all of a sudden be good enough for the job. We have a guy whose excuse for the past 18 months has been, "Hey, I'm new here," but at the same time, we're still getting hamstrung by this sort of thing. We have other contracts that we could get rid of, and I'm sorry, there's a lot of frustration here, Frank, and it's tough to deal with.
Well, I heard a lot of things that I said years ago in that statement you just laid out. I said it years ago. The problem with the Leafs is that they're a target, all right, and worst of all, the biggest target is Leaf fans. We leave this event, and if you listen to Marchand and you listen to the coach of the Florida Panthers, this is all the fault of the fans, and it's all the fault of Toronto because Toronto puts too much pressure on their team. I think it's nice and convenient to be in a place where you can pay players and literally and figuratively pay them more money and have less accountability. The two things are exactly. It's not only that they pay this much more money. If this is 100%, they pay half as much. They can pay that much more money. And the stress level of playing in Florida, who gives a rat's ass about Florida? Not even Floridians give a rat's ass about the Florida Panthers. The only people that care are the people that go to the game, and there might be, maybe twice as many as that of fans. The reason that they have fans, and is the only reason, it's not because they love hockey, it's because they have a winner. It's that simple. Look, they said 2 million people were out there when the Raptors won their championship. 2 million. There's no 2 million viewers watching the Raptors on any given night. Yeah. And this is the same thing. Here's the curse. Real simple. Players come into this town and think they buy the hype. We're Leaf fans because the hype is so large here. It travels with the team. Every town has a lot of Leaf fans. These players, the biggest challenge they have is to not allow their heads to swell to too large a place. And you know what? They're human. When the biggest group of people in hockey, a fan base, the biggest fan base tells you how wonderful you are, can one be blamed for thinking they are? That's not the fault of the fans. That's the fault of circumstance. Circumstance is such that the Toronto Maple Leafs have one of the biggest followings in hockey. And that big following creates a situation where players might think more highly of themselves than they deserve. Case in point, and then I'll let you jump in. Case in point, Marner, Matthews, Nylander, all these players, even Riley, are breaking Leaf records, right? That sounds, wow, that's amazing. That is so amazing. They're breaking these records that are 50, 60 years old. But they're beating records of a historically incompetent organization. So they think they're wonderful and we're so great. Look at these records we're breaking. But they're breaking records of incompetence. And so, they think they're wonderful, but they're not. They're basically, when you watch Marner and Matthews play in the playoffs, honestly, I ask anybody who sees this, I ask you, Aaron, how many other players do you think play better in the last 5 years in the playoffs than Marner and Matthews?
Pretty much everybody. Let's be honest here. If Matthews and Marner and Nylander and Tavares and Riley and whoever the stud muffin was supposed to be that we brought into net played better, we'd have won a Stanley Cup. And that's the problem. They're great during the regular season, but once the playoff hits, they absolutely disappear. You know, it's you're right to laugh when you mentioned the fact that they were breaking records. You know, I mean, they're breaking records from a team that couldn't make the playoffs when 16 out of 21 teams made it.
They
You know,
finished
that's
first, and the talk about how amazing that was for a Leaf team over the span of 60 something years have done it only once. Hello, are you not listening to yourself? They did it once before, and this team is basically a great regular season team. Go ahead, Aaron.
yeah, and you know, it's great to look back at the Maple Leafs record since 2005, where there was a string of 7 years in a row where we didn't make the playoffs at all, followed by losing in the quarterfinals to the Bruins in 2012, 2013, followed by another 3 years where we didn't qualify for the playoffs, followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 round one exits and 2 round two exits. As a Maple Leafs fan, and I'm desperately reaching here, I take some small comfort in the fact that we managed to win 3 games in the second round instead of just 1 against the Florida Panthers. And I'm
you have every right to feel that way when you look at history. That's the same discussion we just had about the records they're breaking.
Yep, it's embarrassing, quite frankly, for us to have a team that does what it does during the regular season and then fail so miserably. It's like somebody sugars the gas tank in between the end of the regular season and the start of the playoffs. I don't know what it is, man. I am at a completely at a loss for words here. But
you know, I find it amazing that you know, you have two people from the other team telling you know, media here in Canada that, you know, it's their fault too, pointing at them as to being to blame for how terribly the Leafs have been treated. I agree with them. I actually agree with them. Now, the last game that was played, we saw one penalty in the game. One penalty. Fair enough. One penalty. But I saw interference. I saw stuff like that was called in the previous game that wasn't called in this game. All I can say is the media for me is to blame because the media is the enabler of incompetence by the referees and the National Hockey League. They don't take them to task. I'm sorry, but I have to look at this series and ask the question. I've asked it before. How many goaltenders have been hit by players, elbowed by players in the net by themselves with that opponent? How many goaltenders in this playoff have had that happen? I had someone post to me, well, what's his name from Edmonton? Kane. Kane did that. No, he didn't. He had 3 defenders, one behind him cross-checking him, and he was heading straight for the puck through the crease. Did he hit the goaltender? I'm sure he did with his feet, and that's totally true. But to compare a player on his own, unescorted, into the crease, brandishing an elbow against the head, comparing those two the same, yes, I agree. I agree with the coach and the Rat that the media is to blame for a lot of the lack of success the Leafs have had. They have not gotten a fair shot. They make it harder for the Leafs to win than they do for other teams. You don't want to admit it. You want to call me a whiner? Please, feel free. But I repeat, count them 4 times in that series. Florida players went into the net unaccompanied, unconvinced to go into the crease, untouched to go into the crease and laid an elbow on 2 different goaltenders, putting one out. And don't tell me that that's not something to complain about. And don't tell me that it's the media's fault because they're too hard on the Maple Leafs, when what I say is they're too easy on the NHL and they do nothing to give the Leafs a fair shot to win. That's my opinion. I'm sticking to it. And that's all there is to it. Again, 4 times, unescorted, Florida players went into the crease on their own, elbows up.
I think I lost you. I think I lost you there, Frank. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I
okay,
think I'm
sorry about that.
I was just saying, I was just repeating myself. 4 times unescorted into the crease, brandishing an elbow against a goaltender's head. I did not see that. I was looking for it. In fact, there was a play similar to that. I think it was Kane. Now you see, I've lost track. There was another play with a goaltender. What was it? less than 24 hours after that, when Stolars ended up out of the game in the first game of that series. 24 hours later, somebody got a penalty for skating through the crease, and there was no elbow applied to the goaltender. It was just the fact that he hit the goalie's skates, and they called it an interference penalty, interfering with the goaltender. So I know what a penalty looks like, not because I'm inventing it, but
because you've seen it called before. Yeah.
Seeing it. So for those of you that hate the Maple Leafs and like the way this ends, congratulations, the Leafs lost. To the Leaf fans, part of this is unfortunately, there's a lot going on here with the Leafs losing. We know also, and I'm going to add this, O'Reilly was traded from St. Louis to Toronto, played in Toronto, and he said on the way out the door, there's too much pressure to play in Toronto. And is that pressure by the fans? He didn't say what the pressure was. And I know, Aaron, at some point, just like when the Tampa Bay Lightning, said that the National Hockey League terminated a trade that the Leafs made for him, and then he won the cup the next year, that, how often does that happen? That the league steps in a trade that isn't illegal. It's just not a good one for one of the teams. When have the National Hockey League ever done that again? So you can try and convince me that I'm speaking on behalf of whiny Maple Leaf fans. You can say that all you want. All I ask you, when you say that, show me what I said. Show me 4 other times a goaltender was elbowed in the head in one series and not a penalty or a suspension was given, and there's video evidence. Just show me one. And if you show me one, hey, you know what? I'll give you 4 times as much right to be correct than I have. And that to me is the bottom line. So what happens is, Leaf fans, you're getting jobbed, and I think you know it. And maybe what should happen, Aaron, and I'm going to conclude it by saying this, maybe what Leaf fans should do is stop going, because the National Hockey League makes a lot of money from Leaf fans. The television revenue that Rogers gets is because the majority of the people who watch those games are Leaf fans. And I think if people just said, you know what, I think we did get jobbed. I think there was some stuff that shouldn't have happened. Now, I'm not complaining about last night's game. That was marginal stuff, right? But I think they were emotionally beat at home, and they deserved to lose that game last night. But this series, Florida got a big hand from the National Hockey League, allowing them to assault the goaltenders 4 times without a penalty, without a suspension. And that, my friend, doesn't just tip the scales. They took out their number 1 goaltender. I'd like to see what would happen to any other team lose their number 1 goaltender if it's just left like this, no penalty, no suspension.
Yeah, and that's the most frustrating thing at the end of the day is we know what's wrong. We see what's wrong. The press enables this behavior by the NHL by saying, oh, it's playoff hockey. It's tougher. It's always been tougher. We should expect this and we should expect that, and nothing's going to get called. They set the table for the NHL to play deliberately into that narrative.
Well, and it's also a little bit of cowardice from the media. Who wants to speak against Gary Bettman in the National Hockey League? You'll end up losing a job. It's speaking truth to power. All right. Speaking truth to power. And that's what I feel this is. The lack of ability or willingness for people in the media at Hockey Night in Canada to speak truth to power. Then, if they don't do that, then power bullies people. That's what happens. The media is the controlling entity that can defend fairness. But if that fairness is something they're not interested in, there's something else they're interested in, then so be it. That's why I think it's come to the point where Leaf fans have to say, and I know it's hard to do. I know they don't want to do it. I know there's so much money in Toronto that, if 18,000 people don't decide to return their season tickets, there's probably another 18,000 waiting to pick up those tickets the very next day. And my friends, that's the only truth about what's wrong with the fans in Toronto. There's too many of them who love this team so much, who will eat shit and still love this team. Because what happened to Stolars was bullshit. I don't care what anybody says. What happened to Stolars was wrong. And the National Hockey League pretended like it didn't happen. And anybody who's a fool to suggest nothing happened there, it's kind of ridiculous. Because don't forget, we watch the rest of the hockey games and we see how you can officiate.
Now, the good news out of all of this is that Tavares' $11 million is coming off the book. Marner's $10.9 million is coming off the book. Matthew Nyes is an RFA. Nick Robertson is an RFA. Max Pacioretty's $873,000 is coming off the book. Pontus Holmberg's an RFA. Steven Lorentz's $775 is coming off the books. Yanni Hakanpää's $1.47 is coming off the books. So that means that there's a good chunk of money that's been freed up here. The question then becomes, what do the Maple Leafs do with the $24 million that's going to be available to them come July 1st? Do you look to bring certain players back? Do you take a look at which players you can bring back based on how they've managed to poison the well against themselves? Much respect to some of those players that refuse to negotiate during the season. But for those of you who are looking for a new contract who refuse to negotiate during the season, postseason does also factor into it. So your performance there will need to be reevaluated along with whatever season you may have had. That is, I think, something that's important for Leaf management to bear in mind going forward. Not to mention the fact that their timeline for a 5-year turnaround, as per Mr. Shanahan, has dragged out for more than twice that at considerable extra cost. And by considerable extra cost, I mean players that could have returned. I mean general managers and coaches that have been fired, and players that have gone on to have success with other teams.
Let me ask you, okay? Let's talk about Trey Living. I haven't seen him under the circumstances, budget, cap, asset, all those things in consideration. You know, Aaron, I don't think he did a bad job. I'm actually impressed with what he did with the limited budget that he had. You know, when the season started, when he came here, let's be honest, folks, we didn't think he had the money to put a team together. There was no money left. So what I think, and I'm asking you, should Shanahan be gone? A, and having said that, should Trey Living have the ultimate power with maybe a little reference with the upper poobahs in the MLSE, right? Like Keith Pelly, for example. Should he be given carte blanche? And if somebody says to him, you can do anything you want and we'll back you. We trust you. We've seen what you've done with the little that we've given you to do it with. Now you're going to end up with no Marner, that money, because the point you're making is all of a sudden that's money that they can spend, right?
Yep.
And the same thing's true for Tavares. And to your point, they could still have Tavares come back at less than half of what he got this year, I believe. If Tavares is as loved and as in love with being a Maple Leaf as he says, does he need more than $2 or $3 million? I
don't think so. I think, a decent hometown haircut to help out the team would not necessarily be out of order.
To give another chance, I believe he sincerely wants to be one of the people whose name goes on the Stanley Cup playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of all the players, I'll call them the core five, all right? Of all the core five, I believe in my heart, with my eyes, and what I've seen of him, he's the one who's the most sincere to want to do it. The only thing he has against him is his speed, his foot speed. He looked slow in this series, Aaron. There were a lot of pucks available to him that he couldn't get to before a Florida player did. He looked slow.
Now, the good news is that our defensive core is locked up, minus the injured Yanni Hakanpää, is locked up until 2026, 2027 at the earliest. That's when Philippe Myers is going to be coming off the list and Simone Benoit is going to be coming off the list. I'm fine with Riley. I'm fine with Tanev. I'm fine with OEL. I'm fine with Brandon Carlo, and I'm more than fine with Jake McCabe. They've been solid for the Leafs all year. Steven Lorentz, gone. Pontus Holberg, out of there. Max Pacioretty, out of there. Nicholas Robertson, sad. Matthew Nyes, going to get paid. Mitch Marner, 10.9. Tavares, 11.3. There's $27.6 million that is going to be available to the Maple Leafs for nenext seaon. If you cannot,
yep.
I was going to say, if you cannot find 6 players for $26.7 million, $27.6 million, if you can't find six players for that amount, even 7, I'm going to say, you're looking at $4 million per. If you can't find 7 players for $4 million per, you need to hang up your general manager's stripes. You need to turn over the key to that office if you're the president of hockey operations for the Maple Leafs, because they're out there. They can be found.
I will again continue where I started framing this. I have faith in Trey Living only because he did so much with so little. Mm-hmm. And he thinks more like what I expect a team to look like that you want to advance in the playoffs. The problem he had, and it's the problem, he had very little money to work with. He had a very little opportunity to bring discount guys that he gets out of the rescue bin, right? The clearance bin, right? He found really good guys like Pacioretty, considering he got him out of a clearance bin, a guy who didn't play what? He played 30 games all year.
Yep.
Right? What he did there, if he could do that again and maybe find somebody who's a little more valuable than Pacioretty. And when I say valuable, I'm not talking about what they do, but what they can do based on who they are, right? Like Pacioretty played up to the best potential I think the general manager hoped for. He hoped that he could play a couple of games and be a key in the odd one because of his experience and how he's been, basically consistently a great game 7 player, a great playoff player. That's the kind of guy that can rub off on the other players. The problem is he didn't rub off on Matthews and Marner. So the question I'm asking now, because I'm still going to stick down that road telling Trey Living to do whatever he wants. Now I have to ask the question, was Matthews hurt? Or was that the healthy Matthews? See, if he's the healthy Matthews, I would ask him, if I was Trey Living, I love Matthews. You know how I've talked about him, right? Yeah. Now, I got to tell you, in this series, I had my thumb on the scale a little bit going, well, he's doing pretty good for a guy who might be injured. He's looking pretty good for a guy who might be injured. He's looking pretty good for a guy that might be injured. I haven't heard yet that he was injured. Now, if we find out that he was injured, what I'm going to say next is irrelevant. But if he played fully healthy with a couple of nagging things that, mm-hmm. then I would say to Trey Living, I go to Trey Living and say, okay, here's the thing. Nobody on this team needs to be on this team next year. Everybody's available elsewhere. Everybody. There's no except for. Everybody on this team's available. You know why, Aaron? Because now they need a rebuild. Because they've got to flush the last 10 years. Aaron, they got to flush the last 10 years. They got to convince me as a hockey fan, not a Leaf fan, as a hockey fan, they got to convince me they're going to bring in a bunch of new guys who don't understand or care about what happened for the last 10 years. That's why, for me, Riley's number one. Of all the defensemen that needs to go, it's Riley. And that first goal last night was typical of Riley having his brain cramp, and he has them at the worst possible time. I mean, that first goal, are we going to argue over how important it was? And wasn't he the biggest reason that goal was scored? It was a 2-on-1, and he left his partner to deal with it alone. So they all, as far as Trey Living is concerned, buddy, anybody you want to get rid of, if you think it'll work, make it work, because this team has had 10 years, and this is with Shanahan going as well. Remember, that was the preface. I said, Shanahan goes, trust Trey Living. He can talk to the big guy, and they can have a conversation. This Leaf team has to flush the last 10 years completely because they've been given ample opportunity to prove that they deserve to continue. And all we got was more of the same.
Now, the only problem I have, and I love the idea of getting rid of players, but if you go to puckpedia.com, they have these little anchor
Mhm.
logos that appear next to certain players. Those are no move clause, which means the players can't be waived, can't be traded, can't be sent down without their consent. The key point is here without their consent. The problem that we have is the players that we'd like to move all have those boat anchors next to their name. And if they don't have a boat anchor next to their name, then they have a shield, which also stands for a no movement clause. So there's like teams, they have 13 team trades, no trade list, a 10 team no trade list, a 17 no trade list, a 16 team no trade list. And you know, the issue again is that there are all these boat anchors literally, and I love that they've chosen that on puckpedia.com.
You,
So, you know, you got to
I
convince
hear
the
you,
player that it's in their best interest to do that.
Aaron. I hear you. You are one. I'm not going to argue with you about that because you're 100% right. But there is something they can do. I hate to tell you, what they can do is bench them, put them in the press box, and say you're not coming down to the ice. If you don't want to be traded, if you don't act reasonably, we don't want you on this team. We feel you've been given an ample opportunity to show that you could be a productive part of this organization, and you failed. So we want a fresh start. Respect it or not, you're going to sit. And I would, and if Trey Living wants Matthews out, then send him up there. Send him up there and have Matthews talk to the media or have Matthews talk to people and say, you know, here's why I think I should be a Maple Leaf, because I have to be. I want to be. Well, you know what? I think he's proven otherwise on the ice. You see, this is the thing. Trey Living putting him up in the press box for whatever amount of time, and then see what happens when he finally gets out of the press box to see what kind of, I don't know, heart he has. Because he's certainly, you know, Marner and Matthews have proven that they're not worth what the Leafs are paying them. They're just not worth it. You know, some of the greatest players in the world haven't won a Stanley Cup. There's a Los Angeles King, Marcel Dion, greatest player one year. He was the best player, best. Played for almost, 25 years. How many Stanley Cups did he get?
None.
Oh, so there's some people that can't win it. There's some players, whether it's bad luck or just because whatever, they can't make it onto a winner. There just are some players who aren't going to win. And so to assume that a guy, because he's great, they're going to win a cup, you're not right. That's wrong. Because how great you are doesn't determine whether you win a cup. It's what happens around you. And what happens around you is deeply impacted by what you do. You know what you don't do? At the end of game 7, when your team loses, you don't stand at the press and you go, well, everybody didn't carry their load. There were passengers here. And that's why we lost. You don't yell at the bench halfway through the second period or whatever it was and yell at the players like they're not doing it, especially when you're both two people who should have said, I should have done better. I let this team down. That's character. And Marner and Matthews, sadly for me, showed that they didn't have the character to stand up and take the responsibility for this loss. And they, more than anybody on this team, were responsible for this loss because it's how much they got paid that denied the team the depth that Florida has, that Dallas has, that other team, Edmonton has. Because, you know, Matthews gets paid more than McDavid.
You do.
And really Marner wants more than what McDavid makes. And so the way it works in hockey, you have a cap. You have X amount of money. If people are sucking the money out of there and not carrying their own weight of money, their money bags, not carrying enough of their money bags, you don't win because you're not insulated by good players around you. And why? Because you've decided you're worth this amount. Yeah, no, I love the way Matthews changed. I love the way he was committed to defense. But what he said at the end of that really pissed me off. And if I was one of the players, how do you think they would feel, Aaron?
Yeah, and that's really the issue when it comes down to it now is how damaged has that room now become thanks to comments that were made after the that were made after the game. You know,
Listen, I saw a team that really, screwed the pooch, shit the bed. I saw it too. I saw it too. But to sit there and point the finger when you can look in the mirror and see someone who let everybody down more than anyone else did, because Marner and Matthews did not offer any kind of resistance on the scoreboard. And that's what they're paid for. We can talk all we want about in the playoffs, we need some. Look at what Florida did. 12 different players scored a goal. Their two big guys didn't score a goal. Yeah, but the quality of players they had and the contracts that those players that did score the goal, I think they got paid a little more money than the Leafs guys. Just a little bit.
the character guys at the bottom. Yeah, yeah.
That's why I laugh because you know what? Once you take the salaries of Marner, Matthews, Nylander, and Tavares out of the equation, I guarantee you, folks, you can look it up yourself. I don't even have to look at it because I know for a fact, in my own heart, I know for a fact that Toronto had less money to play with than Florida when it comes to the other 15 or 13 players. That I know for sure. And, a guy like, well, anyway, you know what? They traded for a guy who was making $9 million a year? Jones, the guy that scored the first goal?
Yep.
His salary was $9 million a year, but they're not paying him $9 million a year. But he was a $9 million a year player. He scored the first goal. It wasn't the winning goal because the Leafs did score a goal. Domi, thank you very much. But that's the problem in my mind with the Maple Leafs. They've spent too much money in one little place and didn't leave enough. But I've said this for 8-9 years now, from the moment those guys arrived, when we started hearing how much money they were going to make. And I'm going, have these guys won a cup? Have they won a series? You may or may not remember. And that's the part that irritated me more than anything. They were paying them like Stanley Cup champs. And we know what happens when teams pay players like Stanley Cup champs. They sink to the bottom of the standings. Chicago Blackhawks, Los Angeles Kings, the list goes on and on of teams that have won the Stanley Cup and then had to pay their players and they dropped like a rock. Well, the Leafs skipped the part where the team won the cup. They skipped that part.
Yeah, it's something that I've been harping on for years about the Toronto Maple Leafs is that they're paying them in advance for future expected performance as opposed to rewarding them for what they've already done.
Now,
you're walking players to free agency with an 8-year franchise tag. You're
right. And to your point, Marner could have been traded last year and had no say in the matter, and they didn't do it. That's the mistake they made. I was so upset with that they had an opportunity to trade him. And then they could have got to the point where they could have said to him at that point, look, we want to re-sign you. How much do you want to be a Maple Leaf? How much do you want? I want to be the highest paid player in the league. Well, you know what? We can't afford to pay you that amount of money. It's just that simple, Mitch. We got to pay other players. We need depth on this team. Our idea is to win the cup, and we need as many quality players as we have. So unfortunately, we're going to have to trade you. So we're going to move on from you. And don't not even say that to him. Work out the trade, make the trade, and explain to him, you know what? You didn't want to dance with us, so off you go. That was the one where I was kicking and screaming. I was so angry when that was the last chance they had to get rid of him. And not just get rid of him, get rid of the attitude where the player is the boss, not the team. Because that was what happened. For those of you that are old enough to remember, I know Aaron's old enough to remember. Remember the Muskoka 5?
I do.
And do you remember what the problem there was? No, I don't want to be traded. I don't want to be traded. If you trade him, I'm not going to be traded. We demand you not trade him. Remember, they stuck to, nope, we want to stay here. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. An individual at work can't decide they can't be fired. I don't have a problem with workers having rights, but I also think the company has rights too. That's all. I think they both have rights.
No, and I don't disagree. At the end of the day, it is what it is. This is the way that it's going to play out. And It really sucks, but something's got to be done, and you've got to convince these players that it's in their best interest for them to move on.
I don't, and I want to make this clear. I don't trust my judgment. So my point from the beginning here was fire Shanahan. He's been here for 10 years. It's been a dog's breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
Trey Living has earned the right to be trusted, again, based on the amount of money he had to work with.
Yep.
And you got to say to him, you know what? There are no untouchables. You can do whatever you want. And if he comes to MLSC and says, look, I want a fresh start. I think we have to get rid of the core four. Maybe we'll bring Tavares back if he's willing to come at a decent price. I want to start over. I know it probably means we can't tell people we're going to finish first. We can't even guarantee that we'll make the playoffs. But I really believe this is what we need to do. We need to develop and have a team with the kind of team first thinking and playoff mentality, and a captain and a teammate that won't say, these other guys sucked. It wasn't me. These other guys sucked, not me. I didn't do nothing wrong.
It's the desire to take responsibility for your own failings and actions. I think that is what's upset me the most out of all of this.
That's what character is. Character is being able to take, when you're the leader of the team, you have to be first in line for criticism, not from everyone else, but from you yourself. And that didn't happen with this Leaf team. We saw Marner and Matthews' attitude. It was them sucked, not me.
Yeah. I'm
disappointed because I had a lot more faith in Matthews than that. That just floored me. What he said that day, I think that was just him trying to work out a way to say, I'm out of here. And just make it happen is what's going to happen, because I don't think, and if we're right about the officiating, Aaron, let's, again, if we're right about the officiating and the players can see it, which I think they can, why play here? And that's going to put MLSC in an awkward position, because if nobody wants to play here and they can't win, the con job is going to be harder to create. It's going to be harder to create, because I really believe these guys deserved better. Like I am sorry for Stolars, who could have had the kind of career changing moment that every athlete is entitled to, based on what they're capable of doing within an environment of fairness. He was denied that. And you can't tell me that doesn't affect the rest of the players, that a guy can be injured and leave for 2 weeks, whatever it is, with a concussion, and the league does that much. No.
Yeah, it's not. It's a difficult situation for everybody at this point, really, is what it boils down to. And at the end of the day, the players are going to have to try to decide which they want more: generational wealth or a Stanley Cup ring. That's what it boils down to, as far as I'm concerned.
And really, Aaron, what you're saying is 100% right, and I will create a little environment around that. It's not about the skill matters. The skill and ability matters a lot, so much, but it's negated by a lack of willingness to commit to the task at hand. Yeah. Anytime you're distracted from doing the job that you need to do for whatever reason, it diminishes your success rate. And this Leaf team proved to me Game 5 that they knew how to suck. In Game 6, they proved to me that they could be committed, and as a team of players playing like a unit, could beat a team that embarrassed them 2 nights before. The scary part is they learned the lesson once, but they couldn't apply it a second time. It's just dumbfounding. But hey, listen, let me be clear about this too. Florida's a damn good team, but they don't need any help. But no, if their bullying tactics are approved by the National Hockey League, no team's going to have a chance, because that alone can make a difference in a series. We're going to see how the officiating because I'm going to watch now, because I want to see if the tactics that Florida used against Toronto are going to be applied against Carolina. And I'm scratching my head wondering, how's the officiating going to look in that situation? If I'm right that they look the other way for Florida, are they going to look the other way for Florida in the next series too? And if they do,
all we have to do is keep an eye on it. The proof will be in the pudding as to what happens in the next round.
Aaron, in conclusion, I want you to have the last word, and I'm going to try to make it you have the last word.
Stellar regular season, top of the division. First time they've ever done that. Multiple players with 90 plus, 80 plus points. First time that's ever happened. And I know that they say that comparison is the thief of joy. Those of you who are happy about the Maple Leafs accomplishments based on, their results against the past 50 years should be disappointed, because the teams that you're comparing these current Leafs to were crap and will continue to be crap. At the end of the day, the responsibility for this does not lie on the fans, does not lie on the press. We are not responsible for what happens on the ice. The players are. The fact that these players have been unable to get anything done since having a first place draft pick dropped in their laps with plenty of time to build around them says to me that it's all got to go. At this point, it's got to be a fire sale. It's the only thing that I will gladly take 10 more years of losing if we can shake what we've got, the endemic rot that insists on selling hope at the core of this friggin' team, because I'm pretty much done.
Well, a couple of words, and that's all I'm going to say, and then say our goodbyes. Let's see. I think the Leafs should step back for a year or two, and let's have a look and see what Montreal and Ottawa can do. Maybe they can do it differently, and maybe they can do it better. Because at the end of the day, my ultimate desire isn't the Leafs winning a cup. It's a Canadian team winning a cup. So let's not forget that the Edmonton Oilers are still in it. They've got to beat Dallas and then beat the winner of Carolina and Florida. But Edmonton fans, you've got a great team. You're very lucky to be in this situation. What I say to you is this: enjoy it, because it doesn't happen every year, apparently, unless you're Edmonton. So everybody have some fun watching the hockey, the Edmonton fans. And I, as a Canadian fan, will be pulling for Edmonton. I have no animosity towards any Canadian team. I like some better than others. I'm not going to lie about that. I don't like them equally. But I got to tell you, if a team has to win the cup this year, I'm hoping it resides in Canada. That's what I hope more than anything.
I'm there with you.
There you go. Thanks, Aaron. Awesome work.
All right, Frank. We'll see you Wednesday.
Go Leafs went.